The Galactic Council had been watching Earth for nearly 50 years before they decided to make contact. They had sent small probe ships that floated silently in the darkness between planets. They had intercepted television signals and radio broadcasts. They had studied everything from human wars to human weddings, from the way humans built cities to the way they buried their dead. Ambassador Al of the Empire had personally reviewed more than 2,000 hours of human footage. He was a tall creature, standing nearly 8 feet high, with a hard shell covering most of his body and compound eyes that saw in spectrums humans could not imagine. His species had conquered 12 star systems and controlled the richest mining sector in the known galaxy. They were not easily impressed. But humans confused him. He had watched footage of human soldiers carrying wounded enemies to safety. He had seen humans weep at the sight of their own sunsets, moved to tears by nothing more than colors in the sky. He had observed them building shelters for animals they would never eat, spending resources on creatures that offered them nothing in return. He had watched a human woman sit beside a dying stranger in a hospital, holding his hand for hours simply so he would not be alone. Had presented his findings to the High Council with confidence. Humans, he explained, were soft creatures. They were emotional and sentimental. They would make fine artists perhaps, or adequate caretakers for the lesser species of the galaxy. But they were not warriors. They were not negotiators. They were not threats. The High Council agreed. When the time came to establish formal relations with Earth, they sent Al to handle the negotiations personally. It would be simple, they assured him. Offer the humans a small trade agreement. Give them access to a few minor shipping lanes. In exchange, take everything of value from their little blue planet. The humans would agree. They were gentle creatures. They did not know how to say no. The human diplomatic vessel arrived at Station Omega-7 on a cold morning by Galactic Standard Time. The station was enormous, a spinning wheel of metal and glass that housed representatives from over 40 species. It floated in neutral space, far from any single empire's territory, and it served as the primary meeting ground for treaties and trade agreements across the quadrant. Al stood in the docking bay with his delegation, watching through the massive windows as the human ship approached. It was a modest vessel, smaller than he had expected. The name painted on its hull read Endurance. Al found the name curious but thought nothing more of it. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and the humans stepped out. There were only 4 of them. At the front walked a man in his early 40s with short gray hair and calm brown eyes. He wore a simple dark uniform with no medals or decorations. His name, Al had been told, was Daniel Carter. He was a former military officer who had spent the last decade as a diplomat. The intelligence reports described him as unremarkable. Behind Daniel walked a woman named Grace. She was younger, perhaps 35, with sharp eyes that moved constantly, taking in every detail of the docking bay. She was his second in command, responsible for security and logistics. 2 more humans followed her, both security officers, both armed with weapons that looked almost primitive compared to technology. Al stepped forward and extended his upper arms in the traditional greeting. Daniel Carter smiled warmly and offered his hand instead. After a moment of confusion, Al accepted the handshake. The human's grip was firm but not aggressive. "Ambassador Al," Daniel said, "thank you for receiving us. My people are honored to be here." "The honor is ours," Al replied, though he did not mean it. "We have prepared quarters for your delegation. I trust you will find them comfortable." "I am sure we will." The first day of negotiations went exactly as Al had predicted. The humans were polite to the point of excess. Daniel Carter smiled often. He complimented the station's architecture. He asked thoughtful questions about culture and history. He presented gifts from Earth, small tokens that held sentimental value but little practical worth. A bottle of wine from a French vineyard, a handcrafted wooden box, a book of poetry. Accepted the gifts with barely concealed amusement. These humans truly did not understand how negotiations worked among the stars. They thought kindness would earn them favor. They thought sentiment would move empires. When the actual discussions began, Al laid out his terms clearly. The Empire controlled the mining sector, home to the richest deposits of quantum crystals in the quadrant. Every advanced species needed quantum crystals for their technology. Without them, faster-than-light travel was impossible. Without them, humans would remain trapped in their tiny corner of the galaxy forever. Al offered humanity access to the sector in exchange for exclusive trade rights to Earth's oceans. The water on Earth, he explained, contained certain mineral compositions that were rare elsewhere. It was a fair trade, he insisted. Crystals for water. What he did not mention was that the access he offered was minimal, barely enough for humanity to build a dozen ships. What he did not mention was that Earth's oceans were worth far more than he was letting on. He was offering scraps in exchange for a fortune, and he expected the gentle humans to accept with gratitude. Daniel Carter listened to the offer carefully. He nodded along as Al spoke. He asked clarifying questions. He took notes. And when Al finished, Daniel smiled that same warm smile and said he would need time to consider the proposal with his team. "Of course," Al said, "take all the time you need." That evening, Al met with his own advisors. They laughed about the humans and their gifts. They mocked the poetry book and the wooden box. They predicted that the treaty would be signed within 3 days, and humanity would thank them for the privilege of being cheated. "They are children," one advisor said. "They do not belong among the stars." "They will learn," another added. "Or they will fade away, it does not matter which." Al agreed. He had seen nothing in Daniel Carter that worried him. The human was pleasant and cooperative. He showed no signs of cunning or aggression. He was exactly what the intelligence reports had described: unremarkable, soft, gentle. As Al retired to his quarters that night, he felt certain that the negotiations would be the easiest of his career. Humanity would accept whatever terms they offered. They simply did not know any better. He could not have been more wrong. In the quiet hours of the station's artificial night, something was about to happen that would change everything thought he knew about humans. Something was about to happen that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. But for now, the ambassador slept peacefully, dreaming of easy victories and gentle prey. He did not know that Daniel Carter was not sleeping at all. He did not know that the human diplomat was sitting in his quarters, reviewing the offer line by line, finding every hidden trap and every buried deception. He did not know that behind the warm smiles and the polite questions, a sharp mind was already preparing for battle. The gentle humans, Al would soon learn, were not as gentle as they appeared. The second day of negotiations passed much like the first. Daniel Carter remained pleasant and agreeable. He asked more questions about the mining sector. He expressed interest in technology. He even invited Al to share a meal, during which he asked about the ambassador's family and with what seemed like genuine curiosity. Al found himself almost liking the human. It was difficult not to. Daniel had a way of making everyone around him feel comfortable. He remembered names. He remembered details from previous conversations. When a junior aide mentioned that her hatching day was approaching, Daniel made a point to congratulate her the following morning. These small gestures meant nothing, of course. They would not change the terms of the treaty, but Al found himself wondering if perhaps humans might serve some useful purpose in the galaxy after all. They could be diplomats for hire, perhaps, professional friends for species that needed to feel appreciated. The thought amused him. That evening, after the day's sessions had concluded, Daniel Carter dismissed his team and told them to rest. Grace protested, as she always did. She did not like the idea of Daniel walking the station alone. There were too many unknown variables, too many species with too many agendas. "I have walked through worse places than this," Daniel told her. I will be fine, get some sleep. Grace reluctantly agreed. She was exhausted, and she knew Daniel was stubborn. Once he made a decision, arguing with him was pointless. She returned to her quarters and fell asleep within minutes. Daniel walked through the station's corridors alone. He liked these quiet moments. The hallways were dimly lit during the night cycle, and most of the station's inhabitants had retired to their quarters. He could hear the soft hum of the life support systems and the distant rumble of the station's rotation. It was peaceful in a way that reminded him of late nights on Earth, walking empty streets after everyone else had gone to bed. He was thinking about the negotiations. The offer was insulting, but he had expected that. Every species in the galaxy seemed to think humans were naive. They looked at humanity's short history among the stars and saw children. They looked at human art and human emotion and saw weakness. Daniel had spent his entire career proving them wrong. He was halfway to his quarters when he noticed the shadows moving. It was subtle, just a flicker at the edge of his vision, but decades of military training had taught him to trust his instincts. He slowed his pace slightly, keeping his breathing steady, and let his hand drift toward the small blade he kept hidden at his belt. The attack came from 3 directions at once. The first assailant emerged from a maintenance alcove on his left. The second dropped from an overhead vent. The third came from behind, moving faster than Daniel had anticipated. They were, all 3 of them, but they were not wearing the formal robes of the diplomatic delegation. They wore dark clothing and carried ceremonial blades, the kind used in honor duels. Daniel understood immediately. These were not official representatives. They were extremists, radicals who opposed any alliance with outsiders. Every species had them. Humans certainly did. The first blade found its mark before Daniel could react. It plunged into his right side, just below the ribs, sliding between the bones with practiced precision. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, a white-hot fire that spread through his entire body. But Daniel did not fall. He did not scream. Instead, he grabbed the wrist of the attacker who had stabbed him. The compound eyes widened in surprise. Humans were supposed to collapse when wounded. Humans were supposed to cry out for help. This one did neither. Daniel twisted the wrist sharply, and something cracked. The shrieked and released his grip on the blade, which remained embedded in Daniel's side. Before the attacker could recover, Daniel drove his elbow into the face of the second assailant, feeling the satisfying crunch of breaking shell. The third hesitated. That hesitation cost him everything. Daniel swept his legs with a low kick, sending him crashing to the floor. A moment later, Daniel's boot was on his throat, pressing down just hard enough to keep him still. 3 attackers, 3 seconds, all 3 were on the ground. Grace arrived 30 seconds later, weapon drawn, breathing hard from her sprint through the corridors. She had heard the commotion from her quarters and had not stopped to think before running toward it. What she found made her freeze in place. Daniel was standing in the middle of the hallway, blood seeping through his uniform, a knife handle protruding from his side. 3 attackers lay groaning at his feet. His breathing was controlled, almost calm, despite the wound that should have dropped him. "Sir," Grace said, her voice tight, "you need medical attention right now." Daniel looked at her. His eyes were clear, focused, showing no sign of shock or panic. "Get Ambassador Al. Tell him negotiations resume in 1 hour. Main chamber." Grace stared at him. "Sir, there is a knife in your side." "I am aware. You could be bleeding internally. You could die." Daniel's expression did not change. "I could, but I will not. Get the ambassador. 1 hour." Grace wanted to argue. Every instinct told her to drag Daniel to the medical bay whether he wanted to go or not. But she had served with him for 5 years. She knew that look in his eyes. She knew that once Daniel Carter decided something, nothing in the galaxy could change his mind. "The knife stays in," Daniel said, answering the question she had not asked. "If I remove it now, the bleeding will get worse. It stays in until the negotiations are finished. That is insane. Perhaps, but it is also necessary. He gestured to the fallen attackers. These people wanted to show their council that humans are weak, that we break easily, that we are not worth the trouble of an alliance. He looked down at the knife in his side and then back at Grace. I am going to show them something different. Grace understood then. This was not stubbornness. This was not pride. This was strategy. The entire galaxy thought humans were soft. Every alien species looked at humanity and saw gentle creatures who cried at sunsets and built hospitals for animals. They saw weakness where there was none. Daniel was about to change that perception forever. Grace nodded slowly. 1 hour, main chamber. I will make sure everyone is there. Everyone, Daniel agreed. Every species, every observer, every camera. I want the whole galaxy watching. Grace turned and ran. Behind her, Daniel remained standing in the corridor, surrounded by his fallen attackers, blood dripping slowly onto the metal floor. The pain was extraordinary, worse than anything he had felt in years. But pain was just information. Pain was just the body's way of saying something was wrong. Daniel already knew something was wrong. He did not need his body to tell him. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. In 1 hour, he would walk into that chamber and show what humans were really made of. In 1 hour, he would negotiate the most important treaty in human history with a knife still buried in his flesh. And he would not give them a single inch. Word spread through Station Omega 7 faster than light itself. The human diplomat had been attacked. 3 extremists had ambushed him in a corridor, and one of them had buried a blade in his side. The attackers were in custody, badly injured, and the human was still alive. But that was not the part that made every species on the station stop what they were doing. That was not the part that filled the main chamber with observers from 4 different empires, all of them pushing and shoving for a better view. The part that shocked them was this. The human had demanded to continue negotiations immediately, not tomorrow, not after medical treatment, now, with the knife still in his body. Ambassador Al had never felt uncertain in his entire career. He had negotiated treaties with warrior species who ate their enemies. He had faced down pirates and warlords and religious fanatics. He had always known exactly what to do, exactly what to say, exactly how to manipulate any situation to his advantage. Now, for the first time, he had no idea what was happening. He stood in the main chamber with his entire delegation, watching the doors and waiting. The room was packed with observers, traders with their 4 arms and metallic skin, scholars with their massive brains visible through transparent skulls, soldiers with fangs and claws designed for killing. All of them had come to see the human. All of them wanted to witness what would happen next. The doors opened. Daniel Carter walked into the chamber alone. The silence that fell was absolute. Not a sound, not a movement. Every eye, every sensor, every compound lens in the room focused on the human as he made his way toward the negotiating table. He moved slowly, each step careful and measured. His uniform was stained with blood. A white bandage was wrapped around his midsection, and through it the handle of the blade was still visible, still embedded in his flesh. His face was pale, his jaw tight, but his eyes were clear and steady. He reached his chair and lowered himself into it with the kind of controlled precision that suggested every movement caused him pain. He placed his hands flat on the table. He looked at Al. "Ambassador," Daniel said, his voice was calm, "shall we continue?" Al found himself unable to speak. He opened his mouth, closed it, and opened it again. Finally, he managed a response. "Ambassador Carter, this is unprecedented. You need medical treatment. We can postpone the negotiations until you have recovered." "No," Daniel said simply. "Your extremists wanted to send a message to your council. They wanted to show that humans are weak, that we break easily, that we are not worth your time or your respect." He paused, letting the words settle. I am here to send a different message." "And what message is that?" Daniel did not smile. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at Al with those calm brown eyes and said, "That we are not what you think we are." The negotiations began. For the next 3 hours, Daniel Carter sat at that table with a knife in his side and methodically dismantled every advantage they had tried to build. He knew their offer was unfair. He had spent the previous night analyzing every clause, every provision, every hidden trap. Now he laid them out one by one, exposing the deceptions with quiet precision. The access rights they had offered were worthless. The shipping lanes they had proposed were controlled by pirates. The trade terms they had suggested would have bankrupted humanity within a decade. Every time tried to defend a point, he found himself looking at the knife, at the blood seeping slowly through the bandage, at the human who refused to acknowledge any of it. "The standard rate for quantum crystal access is 12% of extracted value," Daniel said at one point, his voice steady despite the sweat forming on his brow. "You have offered us 47%. That is not a partnership. That is exploitation." "The rate reflects the risks involved," Al argued, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. "The risks are minimal, and we both know it. The sector has been stable for 300 years. You are charging us for dangers that do not exist." On and on it went. Daniel never raised his voice. He never made threats. He never once mentioned the attack or the knife or the pain he was obviously feeling. He simply negotiated, point by point, clause by clause, with the same calm professionalism he had shown on the first day. But everything was different now. Grace sat behind him, watching the room carefully. She saw the way the other species were looking at Daniel. The who respected only strength were leaning forward with something like admiration in their eyes. The who valued intelligence above all else were nodding along as Daniel exposed each flaw in the offer. Even the who respected nothing but violence seemed impressed by the human who had defeated 3 attackers and then walked into negotiations without stopping to rest. She realized something then. This moment would define humanity for generations. Every species in this room would tell this story. Every empire in the galaxy would hear about the human who negotiated with a knife in his side. They had thought humans were gentle. They had thought humans were soft. They had looked at humanity and seen poets and artists and caretakers. Now they saw something else. 2 hours into the negotiations, Daniel's hands began to tremble. He pressed them flat against the table to hide it, but Grace noticed. So did Al. "Ambassador Carter," Al said carefully, "perhaps we should take a brief recess. You appear to be in some discomfort." Daniel's eyes met his. "I appreciate your concern, Ambassador, but I am fine. Shall we discuss the mutual defense provisions?" Hesitated. He wanted to press the point, to insist on a break, but something in Daniel's gaze stopped him. There was no anger in those brown eyes, no desperation, just a quiet, unwavering determination that Al had never seen before. The negotiations continued. By the 3rd hour, Daniel's face had grown even paler. His breathing was shallow and his words came a little slower than before. But he did not stop. He did not waver. He kept pushing, kept negotiating, kept fighting for every point that mattered. And one by one they gave ground. The access rates dropped from 47% to 20%. The shipping lanes were replaced with legitimate routes. The trade terms were rewritten to benefit both parties equally. The mutual defense provisions, which had originally offered humanity nothing, were expanded to include real protections. It was not a perfect treaty. Daniel knew he would not get everything he wanted, but it was fair. It was honest. It was something both species could live with. And he had won it with a knife in his side. When the final terms were agreed upon, Al sat back in his chair and looked at Daniel Carter with new eyes. He had spent 50 years studying humans. He had thought he understood them. He understood nothing. "Ambassador Carter," Al said quietly, I must ask you something." Daniel nodded. "Ask." Why do this? You could have postponed. You could have used the attack to demand concessions born of guilt. You could have played the victim and let sympathy win you better terms. Instead, you sit here bleeding and negotiate as if nothing has happened. Why? Daniel was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but clear. "Because that is not who we are." The chamber remained silent after Daniel spoke. Every being in the room was watching him, waiting for him to continue. Even the soldiers, who normally showed no interest in words, had stopped their restless shifting. Daniel took a slow breath. The pain in his side had settled into a constant burning that made it difficult to think clearly. His vision was starting to blur at the edges, and he knew he did not have much time left before his body would force him to stop. But he needed them to understand. He needed the entire galaxy to understand. "My people have a long history," Daniel said. "We have existed on our world for hundreds of thousands of years. In that time, we have done terrible things to each other. We have fought wars that killed millions. We have committed cruelties that I cannot describe without feeling ashamed. We have seen the worst that intelligent beings can do to one another." He paused, pressing his hands more firmly against the table to steady himself. "But we have also seen the best. We have seen soldiers carry wounded enemies to safety because letting them die felt wrong. We have seen strangers give everything they own to help people they would never meet. We have seen humans travel across the world to rescue animals from disasters because the thought of leaving them behind was unbearable." Leaned forward slightly. "That is what confuses us about your species. You are capable of such violence, yet you choose such gentleness. It makes no sense." "It makes perfect sense," Daniel said. "The gentleness is not weakness. It is a choice. Every day, every moment, we choose to be kind when we could be cruel. We choose to help when we could harm. We choose to create when we could destroy." He looked at the knife handle still visible against his uniform. "And when violence comes to us, when someone tries to break us, we choose how to respond." "You chose to keep fighting," Al said. "I chose to finish what I started. That is not the same thing." Daniel shifted in his chair, wincing as the movement sent a fresh wave of pain through his body. Grace half rose from her seat, ready to intervene, but Daniel raised a hand to stop her. "Ambassador Al, you studied my people for 50 years. You watched us cry at sunsets and build shelters for stray animals. You saw our art and our music and our literature, and you concluded that we were soft, that we were weak, that we would be easy to manipulate." Al did not deny it. There was no point. "But you missed something important," Daniel continued. "You saw us being gentle with things that could not hurt us. You saw us being kind to creatures that posed no threat. What you did not see was how we respond when something we love is threatened. What you did not see was what we become when we have no other choice." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every species present. "Humans are not warriors because we enjoy violence. We are warriors because we have learned that some things are worth fighting for: our families, our friends, our home, our future." He turned back to Al. "When your extremists attacked me tonight, they thought they were proving a point. They thought they were showing your council that humans break easily. Instead, they showed something else entirely." "And what is that?" Al asked. "That we do not break, we bend, we bleed, we suffer, but we do not break, not when it matters, not when the people counting on us need us to stand." The words hung in the air. Somewhere in the chamber, a translator was whispering urgently to a colleague, explaining the human concept of unbreakable will. An observer was recording everything, preparing a report that would be studied in academic institutions across 3-star systems. Daniel continued, his voice growing quieter but no less intense. "I have buried friends, Ambassador. I have held dying soldiers in my arms and told them everything would be all right even when I knew it would not. I have written letters to families whose children would never come home, trying to find words that could somehow make sense of senseless loss. I have seen the worst that existence has to offer. He touched the knife handle gently, almost thoughtfully. A knife in my side is not the worst thing that has ever happened to me. It is not even close, and I will not let it stop me from doing what I came here to do. Was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. The condescension was gone. The superiority was gone. What remained was something that might have been respect. Your species, Al said slowly, is not what we thought. Daniel nodded. No, we rarely are. We saw the tears and the art and the kindness, and we thought it meant you were weak. I know, but now I understand. Al's compound eyes seemed to focus more intently on Daniel. The kindness is not weakness. It is restraint. You choose to be gentle because you could choose to be something else entirely, something far more dangerous. Daniel did not disagree. How many wars have your people fought? Al asked. Too many to count. And yet you still choose kindness first. You still build hospitals and write poetry and weep at beauty. Because those things matter, Daniel said. Because without them, what are we fighting for? What is the point of surviving if we lose everything that makes life worth living? Al stood slowly. The rest of the delegation watched in confusion as their ambassador moved around the table. He stopped in front of Daniel and extended all four of his arms in a gesture that Daniel did not recognize. This is the sign of equal respect, Al explained. It is offered only to those who have proven themselves worthy. In 500 years of diplomatic service, I have never offered it to another species. Daniel looked up at him. Despite the pain, despite the exhaustion, he managed a small smile. I am honored, Ambassador. The honor is mine. Al lowered his arms. I will recommend to my council that we renegotiate this entire treaty, not because we fear you, Ambassador Carter, but because we respect you, and because I now understand that humans are not the gentle prey we believe them to be. We never were. No, you never were. Daniel finally allowed himself to lean back in his chair. The movement made him grimace, but the worst was over. He could feel it in the room, in the way every species present was looking at him differently now. He had come here to negotiate a treaty. He had ended up changing the way the galaxy saw humanity forever. Grace appeared at his side. Sir, the medical team is waiting. We need to get you to the bay now. Daniel nodded weakly. The adrenaline that had kept him going was fading, and the pain was rushing back with terrible intensity. But as he rose from his chair, supported by Grace's steady arm, he felt something else too. Pride, not for himself, for his species, for all the gentle, stubborn, unbreakable humans back on Earth who would never know what had happened here tonight but who had made him who he was. He had shown the galaxy what humanity truly was. And the galaxy would never forget it. The medical bay of Station Omega-7 was cold and sterile, filled with equipment designed to treat dozens of different species. Daniel Carter lay on a table built for beings twice his size, while alien doctors argued over the best way to remove the blade from his side. Grace stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching everything with sharp eyes. She had not left Daniel's side since they departed the negotiation chamber. She would not leave until she knew he was safe. The surgery took 2 hours. The blade had been designed for honor duels, not for killing, which meant it had deliberately avoided the major organs. The wound was serious but survivable. When the doctors finally finished, they told Grace that Daniel would need several days of rest before he could travel. He was awake again within 6 hours, asking for updates on the treaty. The formal signing is scheduled for tomorrow morning, Grace told him. Ambassador Al has already contacted the High Council. He is recommending a complete revision of their approach to humanity. Daniel nodded slowly. The painkillers had dulled the worst of the agony, but he could still feel the tight pull of the stitches in his side. What about the extremists? In custody, the council has formally apologized and promised a full investigation. They have also offered to pay reparations to you personally. Decline them. Grace raised an eyebrow. Sir, we did not come here for money, Grace. We came here for respect. We have that now. Money would cheapen it. Grace considered this for a moment, then nodded. I will inform them. The news of what had happened at Station Omega 7 spread across the galaxy faster than anyone could have predicted. Recordings of the negotiation were shared through diplomatic channels, academic networks, and military intelligence services. Within a week, every major species in the known galaxy had seen the footage of Daniel Carter walking into the chamber with a knife in his side and negotiating for 3 hours without complaint. Reactions varied. The who valued strength above all else immediately requested formal diplomatic relations with Earth. The who prized intelligence began sending invitations for human scholars to visit their universities. The who respected only warriors declared that any species capable of producing someone like Daniel Carter deserved to be treated as equals. But it was the response from ordinary beings across the galaxy that surprised everyone most. In cities, citizens began questioning their government's treatment of other species. If the gentle humans were capable of such determination, what else had they been wrong about? In markets, traders started seeking human goods, curious about the species that had captured their imagination. On research stations, scientists began studying human history with fresh eyes, looking for the qualities that had produced such remarkable resilience. The story spread from system to system, empire to empire, world to world. It was told in council chambers and military academies. It was discussed in taverns and temples. It became a legend, a parable, a lesson. The humans, they said, you know about the humans, the ones who cry at sunsets and build hospitals for animals. One of them sat through a 3-hour negotiation with a knife in his side, never raised his voice, never complained, never stopped fighting for his people. That is what humans are, they said, gentle until you give them a reason not to be. The treaty was signed the following morning in a ceremony that was broadcast across the quadrant. Daniel Carter stood at the signing table, moving carefully to avoid straining his wound, and placed his signature beside Ambassador Al's mark. When it was done, Al approached him one final time. Ambassador Carter, they said quietly so that only Daniel could hear, I have spent my entire career studying other species. I have learned their weaknesses and their strengths. I have exploited their fears and their desires. I thought I understood how the galaxy worked. Daniel waited. But I never understood humans. I looked at your kindness and saw weakness. I looked at your emotions and saw vulnerability. I was blind. You are not alone in that blindness, Daniel said. Most of the galaxy sees us the same way. They will not anymore. Al's compound eyes seemed to glow with something that might have been admiration. You have changed everything, Ambassador, not just for your people, for all of us. You have shown us that strength and gentleness are not opposites, that kindness is not the absence of power, but the choice to use power wisely. Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering his response. When I was a young soldier, he said finally, I served under a commander named Maria Santos. She was the toughest person I ever knew. She could march for days without rest and fight battles that would break most people. But she also kept a garden on our base. She grew flowers, not for any practical purpose, just because she thought they were beautiful. He looked at Al directly. I asked her once how she could be both things, a warrior and a gardener, a fighter and someone who cared about flowers. She told me that was the whole point. She told me that the flowers were why she fought. That protecting beautiful things, gentle things, kind things, was the only reason worth putting on a uniform. Al was silent. We are not gentle because we cannot be strong, Daniel said. We are gentle because we have seen what happens when strength has no kindness to guide it. We have seen empires that valued only power. They burned themselves out, ambassador, every single one of them. They became monsters, and monsters always destroy themselves in the end. So you choose kindness. Every single day, even when it is hard, even when it would be easier to be cruel. Daniel touched his side gently. And when someone forces us to fight, we fight. But we never lose sight of why we are fighting. We never become the thing we are fighting against. The signing ceremony concluded. Daniel and Grace returned to the Endurance with the completed treaty and prepared for the journey home. As their ship pulled away from Station Omega-7, Daniel stood at the viewing window and watched the station shrink into the distance. Grace joined him after a while. "You changed everything," she said. "You know that, right? The galaxy will never look at us the same way again." Daniel nodded slowly. "I hope that is a good thing." "It is," Grace smiled slightly. "You showed them who we really are, not the version they imagined, the real thing, the complicated, contradictory, beautiful mess that is humanity. We are certainly all of those things." They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars drift past. "What happens now?" Grace asked eventually. Daniel considered the question. "Now we go home. We report to our government. We begin building the relationships that will define humanity's place in the galaxy for the next 100 years." He turned to look at her. "And we try to live up to the promise we just made." "What promise is that?" "That we will be gentle when we can, strong when we must, and always, always human." The Endurance jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying its crew and its precious treaty back toward Earth. Behind them, the story of what had happened was already spreading, already changing minds, already transforming the way the galaxy thought about the small blue planet and its curious inhabitants. They had thought humans were gentle. They were right about that. But gentleness, the galaxy was learning, was not the same thing as weakness. And humans, it turned out, had never been weak at all.